September 22nd, 2023, 11:47 a.m., 𝙄𝙣𝙨, Crimea. Inside the Black Sea Fleet headquarters, Russian naval officers gather for what they believe is a routine command meeting. The building sits in the heart of occupied territory, protected by layers of air defense systems. S-400 batteries scan the skies. Panzer units stand ready. Every radar screen shows nothing unusual. The Russian admirals feel untouchable. This is their fortress, their safe zone, hundreds of kilometers from the front line. Outside, the Black Sea stretches calm and gray under the autumn sun. Then the sky fractures. 3 Storm Shadow cruise missiles, flying low and fast, punch through Sevastopol's defenses like they don't exist. The first missile hits the headquarters' western wing. The second strikes the central command section. The third slams into the eastern communications hub. In 18 seconds, the nerve center of Russia's Black Sea Fleet transforms from a symbol of occupation into a burning crater. 34 Russian officers die instantly, including some of the highest-ranking naval commanders coordinating attacks on Ukrainian cities. Over 100 more are wounded. The building that housed Russia's maritime aggression against Ukraine becomes a tomb. This wasn't luck. This was patience, intelligence, and Western technology converging on a single devastating moment that changed the Black Sea War forever. If you're here, you already know this war isn't just about holding territory. It's about Ukraine systematically dismantling Russia's ability to wage its brutal invasion while the world watches. Today, we're breaking down one of the most significant precision strikes of this conflict. Not because of the explosions, but because of what it represents. Ukraine took a weapon system designed by Britain and France, integrated it onto Soviet-era jets, gathered intelligence on one of Russia's most protected command centers, waited for the right moment when leadership gathered, and struck with surgical precision. This operation didn't just destroy a building. It decapitated naval command structure, forced Russia to completely reorganize Black Sea Fleet operations, and proved that no occupied Ukrainian territory offers safety to military aggressors. We're going deep on the technical details, the intelligence preparation, and the strategic consequences that are still rippling through Russian military planning. This is about understanding how modern defensive warfare works when a country fighting for survival gets access to advanced Western systems and knows exactly how to use them. What you're about to see isn't propaganda. It's operational analysis based on verified strikes, confirmed casualties, and documented tactical outcomes. Ukraine has every legal right under international law to strike military command centers coordinating attacks on its cities and civilians. So let's break down how Ukrainian forces turned patience into precision, intelligence into action, and Storm Shadow missiles into the weapon that made Russia's Black Sea Fleet Command realize that occupation doesn't equal immunity. Stay until the end, because the aftermath of this strike fundamentally altered how Russia operates in occupied Crimea. To understand why September 22nd mattered, you need to see what the Black Sea Fleet headquarters represented in Russia's war machine. This wasn't just an administrative building. It was the central nervous system coordinating naval strikes against Ukrainian port cities, managing submarine operations, launching Caliber cruise missiles at civilian infrastructure, and directing the blockade that threatened global food security by trapping Ukrainian grain exports. From this headquarters, Russian admirals planned missile strikes on Odessa, coordinated attacks on Mykolaiv, and directed naval forces that had been bombarding Ukrainian coastal positions since February 2022. Every ship movement, every submarine deployment, every decision about which Ukrainian city to hit next flowed through this command center. Ukrainian military intelligence had been watching the facility for months. multiple intelligence streams converged on the headquarters. Satellite imagery tracked vehicle movements and identified patterns in Russian command routines. Signal intelligence intercepted communications, revealing when high-level meetings occurred. Human intelligence sources confirmed that senior naval leadership regularly gathered at this specific location for operational planning sessions. The intelligence picture showed clear vulnerabilities. Despite sitting in occupied Crimea surrounded by air defense systems, the headquarters relied on the assumption that distance from the front line equaled safety. Russian forces had concentrated their most sophisticated air defense coverage around military bases and strategic infrastructure, but the headquarters itself sat in a position that created radar gaps when missiles approached from specific vectors. Ukrainian planners identified a critical window. On September 22nd, intelligence confirmed that Black Sea Fleet leadership would gather for a major operational meeting. This wasn't routine staff work. This was senior command planning the next phase of naval operations against Ukraine. The weapon system chosen for this mission was the Storm Shadow cruise missile, a Franco-British air-launched weapon that had been delivered to Ukraine during summer 2023. These missiles represent some of the most sophisticated technology in modern precision strike warfare. Storm Shadow carries a 450-kilogram warhead specifically designed to penetrate hardened targets. The missile flies at near subsonic speeds, using terrain-following navigation to stay below radar coverage. Its range exceeds 250 kilometers when launched from aircraft at optimal altitude and speed. The guidance system combines GPS with inertial navigation and terminal infrared imaging, allowing the missile to find and hit specific buildings even when GPS jamming is active. Ukraine had modified Soviet-era Su-24 bomber aircraft to carry and launch these British missiles. Ukrainian engineers solved the complex integration challenge of connecting Western guidance systems to Soviet avionics, creating a hybrid platform that Russian intelligence had underestimated. The Su-24 platform offered specific advantages for this mission. The aircraft could carry 2 Storm Shadow missiles, approaching the target area at low altitude to avoid early radar detection. MiG-29 and Su-27 fighters equipped with AGM-88. HARM anti-radiation missiles would provide escort, ready to suppress any Russian air defense systems that activated during the approach. Russian air defenses in Crimea included S-400 long-range systems, Buk medium-range batteries, and Panzer short-range gun missile systems. On paper, these created overlapping coverage that should have made any air attack suicidal. In reality, Storm Shadow's low-altitude flight profile and small radar cross-section allowed it to exploit gaps in the coverage. The timing was critical. Ukrainian forces needed to strike when leadership was present, but before Russian forces could relocate command functions or increase defensive measures. Intelligence updates continued flowing until hours before the operation, confirming target occupancy and refining strike parameters. Everything pointed to one conclusion. If Ukraine could deliver Storm Shadow missiles through a narrow attack corridor at precisely the right moment, the Black Sea Fleet's command structure would be catastrophically disrupted. September 22nd, 2023. The operation begins hours before missiles fly. At a secure Ukrainian airbase, ground crews prepare a Su-24 bomber for its mission. The aircraft, a Soviet design from the 1970s now carrying British precision weapons, undergoes final systems checks. 2 Storm Shadow missiles hang from modified underwing pylons. Ukrainian technicians verify electrical connections between the missile's guidance computers and the aircraft's weapons management system. The integration of Western missiles onto Soviet aircraft required solving problems no military manual covered. British and Ukrainian engineers had spent months developing adapter interfaces that could translate targeting data from NATO standard formats into signals the Su-24 could process. The solution involved custom-built circuit boards, modified software, and extensive testing that proved the hybrid system could work under combat conditions. The pilot receives final intelligence updates at 9:30. Satellite imagery from 2 hours earlier confirms normal activity around the headquarters building. Signal intelligence indicates communications consistent with a major meeting in progress. The target window is open. At 10:15, the Su-24 launches. The bomber climbs to cruising altitude while still over Ukrainian-controlled territory, then drops to extremely low altitude as it approaches areas covered by Russian radar. Flying at 200 meters above the Black Sea, the aircraft uses the radar horizon to mask its approach. At this altitude, even powerful S-400 systems cannot detect the bomber beyond 40 kilometers due to Earth's curvature. 𝙄𝙣𝙨 fighters armed with HARM missiles take off minutes later, positioning themselves to strike any Russian radar that activates and threatens the strike package. Their mission is suppression of enemy air defenses. If Russian systems light up and attempt to engage the Su-24, the MiGs will fire anti-radiation missiles that home in on radar emissions. The Su-24 maintains radio silence throughout the approach. All navigation relies on pre-programmed waypoints and GPS coordinates. The pilot flies a carefully planned route that exploits known gaps in Russian radar coverage, using terrain features and the sea surface to remain undetected. At 11:35, the Su-24 reaches the launch point, approximately 270 kilometers from Sevastopol. The aircraft climbs briefly to 1,500 meters to give the missiles optimal launch parameters. This altitude provides the storm shadows with enough potential energy to maximize their range during the subsequent glide phase. The weapons officer activates the targeting sequence. Storm Shadow's guidance system receives final target coordinates, approach vectors, and terminal attack parameters. Each missile is programmed to hit a specific section of the headquarters building. The first will strike the western wing where communications equipment is concentrated. The second targets the central command section. A third missile, launched from a second Su-24 that approached from a different vector, aims for the eastern wing housing operational planning spaces. At 11:38, the first Storm Shadow separates from its pylon. The missile's turbofan engine ignites, and the weapon immediately descends to ultra-low altitude. Within seconds, Storm Shadow is skimming less than 30 meters above the sea surface, accelerating toward Crimea. The second missile launches 20 seconds later, following a slightly offset flight path that will bring both weapons onto target within seconds of each other. Staggered arrival times prevent Russian defensive measures from engaging multiple threats simultaneously. Storm Shadow's flight profile is designed for survival. The missile flies so low that its radar return merges with ground clutter and sea surface reflections. Its small cross-section makes detection extremely difficult, even for systems specifically designed to engage low-flying cruise missiles. The terrain-following navigation system constantly adjusts altitude to maintain optimal height above the surface, rising over hills and descending into valleys. As the missiles cross from sea to land, Russian radar operators see nothing. Panzer systems designed to intercept exactly this type of threat remain silent because their radars never acquire valid tracks. The Storm Shadows are simply too low, too small, and too fast for the engagement sequence to complete. At 11:46, the first Storm Shadow enters its terminal attack phase. The missile's infrared seeker activates, comparing the ground below against stored imagery of the target area. The guidance system identifies the headquarters building, makes final course corrections, and commits to the attack. Social media footage captured by residents shows the moment of impact. The Storm Shadow appears as a dark blur streaking across the sky at high speed. Then the western wing of the headquarters building erupts in a massive explosion. The 450-kilogram warhead, designed to penetrate hardened bunkers before detonating, smashes through the structure's reinforced concrete and explodes inside the building. The blast creates overpressure that travels through internal corridors and rooms, multiplying the destructive effect. Personnel inside have no warning and no protection. The warhead's fragmentation turns everything in the western wing into lethal projectiles. 18 seconds later, the second storm shadow hits the central command section. This explosion is even more devastating because it strikes the building's structural core. Load-bearing walls collapse. The roof caves inward. Fire spreads instantly through spaces filled with electronics, paper documents, and fuel from backup generators. The third missile, arriving from a different approach angle, slams into the eastern wing. This section housed communications equipment vital for coordinating fleet operations. The explosion severs fiber optic cables, destroys radio systems, and obliterates the satellite communication terminals that linked the headquarters to Russian naval forces across the Black Sea. By 11:47, less than 1 minute after the first impact, the Black Sea Fleet headquarters is a catastrophic loss. Smoke rises hundreds of meters into the air. Secondary explosions continue as stored ammunition and fuel ignite. The building that represented Russian naval power in occupied Crimea has become a disaster scene where rescue efforts will recover bodies for days. The Su-24 strike aircraft, having launched their missiles and immediately turned back toward Ukrainian airspace, land safely at their bases. No aircraft losses, no personnel casualties. Mission complete. In Moscow, Russian military leadership begins receiving reports that their Black Sea command structure has just been effectively destroyed. The immediate damage to the headquarters building was total. Satellite imagery taken hours after the strike showed complete structural destruction across all 3 wings. The central roof collapsed into the building's interior. Fire damage extended through every floor. What remained was an empty shell unsuitable for any military purpose. Ukrainian military intelligence reported 34 Russian officers killed in the strike, including high-ranking naval commanders responsible for coordinating Black Sea Fleet operations. Over 100 additional personnel sustained injuries ranging from minor to critical. Russian authorities never confirmed these casualty figures, but they also never produced any of the senior officers allegedly killed in the attack, despite weeks of scrutiny from military observers. Among those reported killed was the Black Sea Fleet commander, though Russia later claimed he was alive without providing convincing evidence. Whether he died or was simply removed from command for the security failure, his effective leadership of the fleet ended that day. The operational impact cascaded through Russian naval operations. The Black Sea Fleet lost its centralized command and control hub. Coordinating multiple ship operations became vastly more complicated. Planning strikes against Ukrainian coastal targets required rebuilding communication networks and establishing alternative command posts. Russia attempted to relocate command functions to backup facilities, but these lacked the communications infrastructure and security of the original headquarters. The fleet's operational tempo visibly decreased in the weeks following the strike as Russian forces struggled to reconstitute command arrangements. The psychological impact hit every Russian military facility in occupied Crimea. Officers who had believed distance from the front line guaranteed safety suddenly realized that Ukrainian missiles could reach anywhere on the peninsula. Command posts that previously operated openly began implementing dispersion measures, moving leadership to multiple smaller facilities rather than concentrated headquarters. This dispersion degraded coordination efficiency, but reflected the new reality that massing leadership in fixed locations invited precision strikes. Russian air defense forces faced impossible questions. How had 3 Storm Shadow missiles penetrated supposedly impenetrable defenses? The answer involved uncomfortable admissions about radar gaps, missile speed and stealth characteristics, and the effectiveness of Ukrainian mission planning. Russian commanders in Crimea demanded more air defense systems, but spreading coverage to protect every potential target meant diluting defensive density everywhere. The strike demonstrated Western weapon systems' combat effectiveness in Ukrainian hands. Storm Shadow proved it could defeat Russian air defenses and deliver precision strikes against hardened targets exactly as designed. This validation influenced Western decisions about providing additional advanced weapons to Ukraine. If Ukraine could successfully employ Storm Shadow with such devastating effect, what else could they do with ATACMS, HIMARS upgrades, or F-16 fighters? For Russian naval operations in the Black Sea, the headquarters strike was one of multiple cascading disasters. Ukrainian drone boats had already damaged several major ships. Storm Shadow strikes would continue targeting Russian naval infrastructure throughout Crimea. The cumulative effect forced Russia to relocate much of the Black Sea Fleet to Novorossiysk, further from Ukrainian striking range, but also further from operational areas. The destruction of the headquarters symbolized a broader shift in the Black Sea theater. Russia's navy, which had dominated the region since 2014, found itself increasingly vulnerable and operationally constrained. Ukrainian forces without a significant naval fleet had effectively neutralized Russian naval superiority through precision strike warfare. From a legal and moral standpoint, the strike represented entirely legitimate defensive operations. The headquarters was a military command center coordinating attacks on Ukrainian cities and civilians. Under international humanitarian law, military command posts are lawful targets. Ukraine struck a facility directly involved in planning and executing military operations against Ukrainian territory and population. The operation's success rate for Ukraine was total. 3 missiles launched, 3 targets hit, command center destroyed, casualties inflicted on military personnel conducting aggressive war. 0 Ukrainian aircraft lost, 0 Ukrainian casualties. The cost-effectiveness was undeniable. Russia learned that occupying Ukrainian territory does not create safe rear areas. Ukraine demonstrated that patient intelligence work combined with precision weapons allows a defensive force to strike critical targets deep in occupied zones. This lesson shaped Russian force posture throughout Crimea and other occupied regions for the remainder of the conflict. The Storm Shadow strike on Sevastopol headquarters represents modern defensive warfare at its most effective. Ukraine demonstrated that a country fighting for survival against a larger aggressor can level the battlefield through intelligence, patience, and surgical precision. This wasn't simply destroying a building. It was systematically degrading Russia's ability to coordinate military operations against Ukrainian cities, ports, and civilians. Every Russian officer killed in that headquarters was one less person planning missile strikes on Odessa or blockading grain shipments that feed millions worldwide. The operation proves that Russia cannot establish secure rear areas in occupied Ukrainian territory. No headquarters, no command post, no concentration of military leadership is safe from Ukrainian strikes. This forces Russia into dispersed, less efficient command arrangements that degrade their operational effectiveness across the entire front. For Ukraine's international partners, the Sevastopol strike validated decisions to provide advanced weapons systems. Storm Shadow performed exactly as intended, proving Ukrainian forces can employ sophisticated Western technology effectively and responsibly against legitimate military targets. The message to Russian military leadership is clear. Gathering in fixed locations, operating from established headquarters, or assuming distance provides security are all potentially fatal mistakes. Ukraine has the intelligence networks, weapons systems, and operational skill to reach anywhere Russian forces mass in occupied territory. If you want to understand how this war evolves, it's through operations like this, where patience and precision matter more than raw firepower. Share your thoughts. Do strikes like this fundamentally change how Russia must operate in occupied regions, or will they adapt their command structures effectively?